Good morning, everyone. Call the meeting of the Fiscal and Qualitative Indicators Committee to order. Noting that this meeting was posted 48 hours in advance, so we're in compliance with the open door law. As I was preparing last night, I was looking over the agenda and said, "Oh, minutes, yeah, what? That's a fail on me." So I started typing last night, but I don't want to give you folks time to review them, so I'll just send them to you afterward. Both for last meeting and this meeting, we can just kind of approve this offline. So, we're going to be addressing a couple districts today. One was Lake Ridge, who we kind of postponed from last time, and then we have folks from Taylor School Corporation here today. So we'll be hearing from them. So, any questions about our agenda for today? All right. Well, with that, I would welcome Courtney Scotsma to the table here to discuss DOE's recommendation for Lake Ridge.
We do have our recommendation today. Just kind of give some background. Lake Ridge was on the excessive education fund transfer list. Their transfer percentage from education fund operations was 0.6%. In their response, well, let me first note, this was also their second. In their response, they indicated that their perspective, the primary reason for being on the list was property tax. They kind of outlined the impact of property tax operations on property tax levy, which they indicated was about 57% reduction in their levy because of the property tax cuts. Lake Ridge also then in their response did go through and outline various actions that they have taken to try to address their situation. This has included a lot of outsourcing, custodial, food services, transportation. They currently are looking into a $20 million they did successful. So what they did in a response outline various things that they have undertaken to try to address their situation. In our review, we kind of still felt that this was maybe more of a unique situation. Also, in their response, they did also indicate that they would be open to any assistance that could be provided by either this committee or IDOE. So, in evaluating what our options were, the things that came to our attention is that the statutes do authorize the division to provide assistance to any school. Given like the situation, we felt that maybe this would be an ideal opportunity to go down that road. It's not something we have done before. It just felt like this might be a good opportunity for us to engage in that way. So we did actually reach out to Lake Ridge, and they did agree to go down this technical assistance path with us. What that will allow us to do will be to introduce various divisions from the department, bring them in, let them really subject matter. Allow them an opportunity to kind of do a deeper dive and see what recommendations we can offer and see if there are things that we can identify that may be helpful. So at this point, we have agreement from Lake Ridge to participate in technical assistance. We're working on kind of what those next steps will be. I will actually be reaching out to them. So given this and given this new, I think at this point our recommendation would be that we didn't think documentation is sufficient, which would allow us some time to have that technical assistance process.
Any questions or comments?
I'll say is that Lake Ridge is a neighboring school district of mine, same county. So I know their story pretty well. Business managers, as Courtney said, they've outsourced a lot of stuff. They try to look tax they have a very low AB. And because of that, tax rate is infernally high. And not only for, I think they said I saw the tax rate was 2.9 or something. That is only for the school tax rate. City, they're outside the city of Gary, but they're kind of get some services. Overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
The overall tax rate is very high. You can see how that is. So, yeah, they're have some situations that aren't necessarily. And then they also have a low collection rate. So we're talking about tax cap pays off just the levy. Well, then they're not getting 100% of that levy that's even remaining either. They have a enormously low rate. So, I know they're trying, and I hope that DOE and the other organizations here are trying. They have it. So, but we're
Yeah, obviously the fact that we're not having them come in doesn't mean that they don't rise to the same level. If anything, I think just in conversation with Courtney, having them come with just the information that we would gather from that kind of already know, and we still need additional information. So that's what this approach will be. Really appreciate DOE's willingness to step up, because that's what's changed here in the last month is them taking the initiative to devote some of their resources to provide a little technical assistance and gather a bit more data. So we'll keep watching them and working with them, and we will keep this committee informed as well. So we're cool with the recommendation. Again, we're not taking a motion, but looking for some head nods that we're cool with the recommendation. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Courtney. All right, I'd like to welcome the leadership team from Taylor forward. With us today, we have Dr. Christopher Smith, superintendent from Taylor Community Schools. Renee Adams is the business manager. And then virtually, we have the president of the school board, Dennis Marlar, is joining us as well. And we recommended last time that they come before the group to provide a bit more explanation than what was provided in their written documentation. We'll turn the floor over to them. So welcome.
You guys just want us to start and ask questions as we go.
Yeah, we'll let you handle the presentation. If you want us to save questions to the end or bring them as they go, it's up to you. Okay, yeah, we'll let you start with the presentation.
So I introduce myself, Chris Smith, 38 years, I'm an Angola, Lakeland, LaPorte County, and now Taylor. I was blessed to hire a businessman also. So with that experience going in, it was huge. You know, to find businessmen is very difficult. I'm very confident one. She's been with us just a solid year. So, we put this together. Of course, my friend Jamie McLean and Conical, we saw watched. This will be, I think, the second time that we transferred in from structural operation. Rob talked about Taylor's been one of those districts for a very, very long time that has struggled financially. So we're going to provide some data to you that I think would be.
I'm Renee Adams. So before I came here to Taylor, I was at Howard County government. And I will say coming to schools was a blessing, but it was also different than county government. I was blessed in Howard County. I didn't have any debt in Howard County. So learning debt, I know that sounds crazy, but that's new to me. And a much smaller, we had a very large cash balance. So I was very blessed with that as well, to not have some of those different struggles that we do here in the school now. So just a little bit about me. I was a nonprofit before that and worked for the government, and now I'm here at Taylor. But I really love my job. And I'm a numbers nerd, so watch out when I nerd out. But that's a little bit about us. Dennis, do you want to introduce yourself? Is he on?
Yes.
Can you hear us talk back?
Yeah, sure. But Renee, thank you. My name is Dennis Marler. Hold on just a second.
Short or sweet.
Okay. So just some of the information, if you don't mind us.
Oh, yep, sorry. Rats.
I'm always so nervous with technology. That's why I printed it off to the other. So I just want to give you guys just some information about our corporation. You guys have all seen the reports. Just pull the numbers. Pulled some of the numbers to get them quick and easy at our fingertips today. So last year, the 21-22 school year, our ADM had gone up to 1264. Previous to that, it had been falling. Last year, Chris really worked hard at marketing to new students, doing a lot to retain the students that we had, and kind of did some other things. So we are super proud of our ADM from last year, and fingers crossed for this year's ADM. We can hold it. I would love to see growth, but it would be a huge accomplishment for us.
Open enrollment in Will County is huge.
Yes, we do have sorry.
That's right. Just between Eastern, Oklahoma Center, Northwestern, Western. it's a lot. Number two, it's just tomorrow.
So the community as a whole is enrollment steady, and you're just kind of kids going one to the other, or just relative to them?
So Kokomo is the city school, and it's been dropping enrollment. All the county schools have been raising. Raising or staying the same. Some of them, I know 2 of our local county schools are maxed out. They can't any new transfers. They're only taking residents students or brothers or sisters that they are students. So the next slide that we have is just our AP for the county. It has been going up every year. We are, I'm not sure how many other school districts are in the situation. We are one township that has it in our, we don't have large industry in our township. We are a big housing community, a big neighborhood, and one of our biggest taxpayers in our area is the hotels that we have and some restaurants. So we don't have a large industry, all residential and very low.
Annexation. Dennis can tell you when that was before I got to go, when they put in the new bypass for 31. For those that know, Kirchhoff, and then from there, Greg Midnight, they annexed out to all the county schools.
This is just some information on our circuit breaker that we've had for losses for the last 7 years. I just threw on here. It has been holding the same for about steady around that 20% every year. This is for just the one time. That is really hard for us. The next slide is if we have tracked out our circuit breaker and how it is fund. It takes giant chunks out of our operations. So just let's just pick your 2020. It took 49%, 49.62% of our operations fund, because that property tax levy is protected for debt service, so it can't take any of that. So it all comes from our operations. I would say our levy roughly is 50-50, 50 debt and 50 operating, 50% debt 50% for our debt service fund and 50% for our operations. I mean, it goes up and down every year, you know, you can see that, but around 50-50 every year. But yeah, to have all of the circuit breaker come from our operations, it really does for us. Just because I'm a numbers nerd, and this makes me, sorry. The next slide we have for you is just our trust balance that we had over, the years. This is year to date or calendar end cash balances. I did throw our 22 fiscal year end on there just so you could kind of have a little bit of an idea of where we're sitting at as of June 30th. We don't have large cash balances. We are skin and bones, but that's okay. We're doing fine. We're doing just fine. We really do cut back and do anything that we can at our district.
Percentage-wise, you're still,
What?
percentage-wise, you're still at a relatively comfortable level.
Yeah. Of course, I would love for it to be higher.
Yeah, that's, I use the word relatively.
That does not keep me up at night. Other things. So the last slide, for number wise, is just our transfer percentages that we have had over the years. We have not been over in 2019, the very first year we were over the 15%. That was the year of the switch, you know, from the different funds and that kind of stuff. So last year for 21, we were at 19.49. Let's just say 19.5. But then this year so far at 22, I am I promise that we will be under the 15% for 20. But yes, we were over for last year for 21s. Does anyone have questions on the numbers, or I just have some information on 21 and then for 22? So some things happened in 21. I don't want to say that had COVID happen, but it did happen. And
Board chose, due to the situation going into we paid the head coaches that were in session, but we didn't pay the assistants. They made a conscious decision to take care of their employees. You know that's huge. So I have a very good board that's very conscious of money. We'll talk more about that. But that's one thing.
so all staff were paid during the shutdown if they worked or if they did not work. That was a large hit to a hit to the checkbook. If you guys don't mind me saying that. The other thing is we did give paid time off. We did have at that time a close contact, or you know, you guys all know the rules changed every other day on if you're a close contact, when you can come back, when you couldn't, all those kind of things. But if they did have COVID or were a close contact, we did pay them. It was 10 days that were getting paid time off. That was just their quarantine time at home. And then it did back down to 5 days with the CDC for the recommendation.
We did a memo of understanding. We made sure.
Another thing that we did is we did have the ARP, the CARES money, and the institute grants. At that time, we were just paying for cleaning of the classrooms and extra masks and the plastic shields and the social tables. I don't want to say housekeeping, but there were a lot of housekeeping things. All of my CARES, the majority of my CARES 1 money was just spent on housekeeping to keep the kids safe, socially distanced, which was new language to all of us. We didn't know how to do that. We worked a lot on learning loss, so we were doing after school tutoring and those kind of things. But a lot of my grant money was spent on COVID prevention at that time. Another thing that we did in 21 was we gave the largest pay raises Taylor had ever given.
Dennis had, his father was on the board too, but it was just short of 14% certified, I believe 10%. We're really proud. Anyone who's known the history of Taylor, this is huge. This is one of the goals that they've had. We've been trying to get that from them. So we're proud, we're ready to move this year and collective bargaining.
So we had to make some large advances to get to the 40,000 minimum for minimum starting salary for the teachers. We had, we didn't have our classified staff aligned. Some classified staff made this, some classified staff made here, and some classified staff made here. That was the audit nightmare. So we had to leave even everyone out. That took up some chunk of our checkbook as well. And then of course to give a raise. Raises were huge. We paid a lot out for raises for last or this current contract here for the teachers.
Have you been below the average for the area? That's what you're making up.
Yeah.
Again, we were the dentist for the comment for a game, which I think would be important. They had to negotiate with collective bargaining. It's right away. I think 23 pages. And Dr. Boyd in Indiana State, we were one of the worst collective bargaining units in most of the state of Indiana. They actually, the teachers gave back. Dennis, you want to highlight that?
I just agree with what you're saying, Chris. I mean, we tried to certainly take care of our staff moving forward and so thank you for your efforts to make this happen. So I think we've done a good job taking care of and being compassionate with the folks during the COVID. And I think that's certainly something we can stand behind and real going forward.
And Mr. Merlo, we're getting a pretty good echo back from you. So I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can mute your speakers or something, but just let you know we got a little feedback.
So I also wanted to give some information.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm having trouble on the audio. I can hear you very well, and the further they get away from you, I'm having difficulty hearing. I think I've corrected the echo now. So I had my phone up as well, trying to get better audio. But going back to what Chris was saying, you know, we've tried to take care of our staff. It's been one of our board goals to do that over the last several years, to fairly compensate them and to make sure that you know, we compensate them so that we can keep the people around. Taylor's a good school district to work for. We believe in the family atmosphere, and we want to make sure I mean, one of the reasons we did what we did during COVID is, number one, it's the right thing to do. We were shut down for COVID, but we didn't feel that our staff and personnel should pay for that. So we compensated them during the shutdowns. And then secondly, you know, we're a family and we believe in taking care of each other. So we've tried to do that going forward where we had funds to do so. And as Chris and Renee indicated, we gave a substantial raise last year, and that was certainly appreciated by all the staff. So we're trying to do what we can to take care of our staff and to make sure we retain our staff, and that's certainly one of our goals going forward.
Thank you, Dennis. So just my last slide is just some things that we're trying to do for 22 to make sure that we're within that transfer percentage and to really optimize our expenditures, or not optimize, decrease and make sure that all of our expenditures in our operations funds are really needed and essential for our school functions. So we have used some more ESSER 2 money as well as some ESSER 3 money for a few of those things, as well as just kind of, you know, just general practice of reducing our expenditures and really watching all the purchases that come through. And my last thing that on the numbers side, just wanted to highlight is that for 22, I am within or below the 15% already for this year. I'm at 14.88. So, and I promise I will do like a little Girl Scout honor if you want me to. That I'll be below the 15 for this year. So I don't want to say it was some education, but it was also a lot of education on me being a new treasurer and being new to the school district and learning a lot as well. And thank you for Chris for having faith in me.
How often do you guys transfer your money?
I do it once a month. But not towards the end. So when it gets closer to that June deadline, I don't do any of that last month, so I can see where my expenditures are for the last of June and end of December.
When you do that transfer, is it a flat amount passed by the board at the beginning of the year, or do you transfer based on need?
It is a flat amount that was set by the board at the beginning of the year. The resolution that we had from last year, was up to 20% transfer. And I had been doing the 20% in the 21, or in 21, when I started at the corporation. I have since changed my ways and I'm just doing a flat 15 right now.
So is the board's resolution up to 15%,
Yes.
where if you don't need to transfer, you don't have
I
to
don't,
transfer?
yeah.
And then on your last slide, you had reducing expenditures in the current budget. What have you reduced? Like what areas?
We have,
Well, due to ESSA, we've have to do some building and grounds things to clean up some things. That's absolutely going to help us. A referendum probably would not be an option for Taylor. 5 school districts within 40 miles.
Mhm.
Our housing addition that we have is called Indian Heights off Old 31, which is 931, 1,124 homes. It was built in the 50s when Delco and Chrysler was huge, and GM and Delphi, of course. And now there's a lot of rentals there. So if we did a referendum, and due to the annexation, that probably would not be interest for our district. And we all know that consolidation is still a push on some other, or our legislators. And Taylor hired me to make sure we don't do that. I was up at South Central when we tried to consolidate with lacrosse, and I was on 20 Minutes Advisory Board way back then. So when Taylor hired me, they wanted to make sure we didn't get consolidated. And of course, Kokomo Center would love that if we could do that. And that's not an option that we plan to do. But as you can see, that circuit breaker kills us. Now, after listening to Lake Ridge, and I do know their superintendent, that's a tough area. Being in LaPorte, Lake County, they didn't have a certified budget to what, 11? And I was in the same boat in LaPorte. So Taylor's had some tough times, but our facilities are in good shape. We've got some rolling off in 26, 27 that we need to do some HVAC and some other things. So we're making good decisions to keep our school running. And marketing, as you know, students are everything. So getting students to come. And we do have 4 buses going into Kokomo when I first came in.
You mentioned the annexation previously in relation to the bypass. You're in the eastern side, I'm sorry.
Yes, eastern side.
Eastern side.
So we're 4 miles out from 930. So when you go, if you were taking the new 31 on the east side, we're about 2 miles out. East.
Okay, so it's implied that the annexation was for, basically for zoning purposes. But isn't there a planning buffer there within?
You might want to ask Dennis about that a little bit more.
Yeah, Mr. Marlowe, can you kind of address the annexation, how it relates to the planning and zoning around the bypass? And I get how that affects you with circuit breaker and so forth, but in terms of generally you have municipal representation in municipal services. It sounds like there's no not a lot of additional. You've got a tax rate on there, but in terms of folks in that area, I guess you kind of alluded to. I was looking for you to expound on that.
You hear that, Dennis?
Mr. Marlowe, we're not hearing you. There you go.
Yeah, I think I heard the question, and we have 2 exits off of 31 that are within our district, but so far we have not. And that 31 bypass, the new bypass, has been open for 5 or 6 years now, and so far we really haven't seen any growth around those exits at all. There's been I know the city annexed it to control that, but there has been no growth whatsoever around either one of those exits that we have in our district currently.
But that's by design. It's kind of what I heard.
so when the city,
Eric Goodnight, go ahead. Eric Goodnight, I met with him and the previous business manager at Northwestern just left. The bottom line is he did not want to affect Red Lobster, Cracker Barrel, those restaurants right on 931, which used to be the old 31. He did not want any building out there, and it hasn't happened. There's 0.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. The city wanted to maintain all the businesses on the old 31, which is now 931. And so we have not seen any growth at all around the exits off of the new 31 bypass. And you'll see that as you travel up there. There's exits there, but there's no gas stations, there's no hotels, restaurants, nothing yet.
So it was by design.
But the impact on you is that now you've got another layer in extra circuit breaker. But in terms of additional AV, you're not seeing.
We were told we were one of the worst, but then Lake Ridge came in and
I do have a question talking about the growth, because your assessed value did grow from 21 to 22, which is the biggest growth, reflected in your chart. So where is the growth coming from? Are you getting a new housing addition or something, or just?
No, I think it's
assessed value?
I think it's just a higher assessed values with the nature of assessing the values to houses.
Okay,
We have not seen any new, we got really excited. Maybe 6 months ago, they announced that they were gonna add a housing addition on to the side of one of our apartment complexes. And then they had to pull out of that deal because it was too expensive for just to even build the houses.
in Howard County, there is a housing shortage, if you can believe it. But business AVs were the 91 out of 92 counties. I was on a task force when I first came to Taylor. And for whatever reason, they were one of the lowest. Now, I believe they've gone up, but I don't have evidence to prove to you. But there was a huge study that the mayor did, and I was on that task force. As my care conference.
So just the other fun packet, this is just all those things that were asked of us to provide for our DOE 54, just so you can see our ADM. Some other reports I put together, maybe just like a 3-year history for our expenditures and kind of what categories they're in, those kind of things, just so you can see. And then a lot of them are our Form 9s and those kind of things. So you can see our balances for our funds and all of those kind of fun things. And my brain works better if you can sort it by colors. So that's why I just put through some different colors in there, just so you can see a break in all the different reports. But these were just some things that were on the back of that requirement for today.
Sorry to jump into the weeds, since you said you won't been here a year. I noticed during 2020, so was this the COVID, you were funding salaries out of operations, is that why that would go on here, and then push back up, part of that's influenced by.
Could be student enrollment too. I mean, the kids were really transit then.
Yeah, I mean, why, something that we spent out of your, like, I'm assuming your revenue into the operations fund, which are all the time, but also in 1 year spent, so you actually spending something here, and then you replenished it a bit, partially influenced by the
higher. Yeah, I'm sorry.
But you said you were here, and probably, this is more of a, a bookkeeping question, not fair to ask it, I guess, but something happened in 2020, you kind of alluded to.
I think it was just a lot of bigger expenses, like with our facilities and stuff like that, is what I would assume it for, because I haven't seen giant other increases in salaries and, those kind of things. So I would say it was probably just a lot of maintenance expenses.
Well, I would just add one, just looking at some of the numbers, one of the positives that you have going for you is that your AV has steadily been increasing. There in 21, it was about 3%, but 5, 6, 8%, that's statewide, countrywide, so we don't know what that is going to be in 23, but if your AV is going up and everything else being constant, that would mean less circuit breaker loss, which means eventually less money have to be transferred to ops. With the growth quotient that we're getting from the state, that means we're going to get additional revenue into ops coming in the first place. Circuit breaker hits that, but it's still an increase there anyway. So there are things coming here annually to help increase the revenue into the ops fund directly, with giving opportunity to keep that transfer amount lower. So we have that going for you. I think that's good. Oh, and this thing, just looking at your circuit breaker loss page, the circuit breaker loss amount here in 22, it's lower than the last 2 years as well. So again, for those exact same reasons, everything else just, I would say, staying the same, but hopefully that will continue to decrease the transfer a little bit less. I like how you're examining the expenditures. I would just caution everybody, we're all using these ESSER funds as best as possible, but in about 2 years, those are gonna be gone. So what's gonna happen when we all see that train coming, so to speak? And we just want to make sure that if you're paying anything out of there now, are they one-time expenditures, or if they're not, will you be able to pull them into other funding in one way? So just be conscious of that.
We are.
We're starting to put back little pockets now in our budgets to hold on to some of those positions, salaries that we are paying like the ESSER funds now.
So as that sport learning loss, we hired 3 MTSS coaches, equity, 1 per building. Then we did 3 behavior specialists. When we hired these people, we told them, when that's the 3's gone, that's it. So we're working collective bargaining with our teachers. How can we make sure that we keep these positions that are so very important? We don't know if it'll happen, plus we'll look for grants, and there's a lot of things coming out. So.
That's the challenge with the ESSER dollars, right? Because ostensibly it's for learning loss. But don't spend operational hours on it because in trying to find that balance. Trying to find that balance of having an impact on learning loss, but yet only do it for one-time expenses.
If you look at our demographics, we have a lot of poverty. We average anywhere from 60 to 71%. Direct cert has dropped off because a lot of the parents aren't filling that out. Now with the lunches, I think we're only paying, we get free breakfast, but with them paying for lunch now, we should hopefully see small direct cert. And then we've tapped into Medicaid. We're doing a lot of different things, just trying to, as Rob talked about, just trying to prepare. As S is gone, it's gone. It's not that far off.
Good question. So you mentioned you're kind of promoting the school, getting students from other, like, this gone from city to county. Is the total pie of the students in the region, is that changing? Like, are you becoming more competitive to get fewer and fewer students, or how does that kind of look for you?
Now, if you were to ask me, and I can tell you the previous superintendents that have been around, they thought Taylor's done a really good job on doing that. Howard County, after coming from LaPorte, the second largest county in the state, coming to Howard County, actually one of the smallest with 5 districts, it's unbelievable. And we market, Eastern Howard markets, Tri-Central, which is in Tipton County, but pretty much Eastern Howard and us take the majority of those students. Northwestern and Western, as she talked about, they're pretty booked out. So to answer your question, it is very competitive. I would tell you, we're trying to do all the dual credit and all those things we can for our high ability kids. We've got interventions built into the day. We've set up our schedule, trying to get these kids to come. So does that answer your question, Jordan?
I'm kind of thinking also, is the county's population going up or down? Like, we have to worry about that as well.
They had 85 million. I can't tell you.
I think it is going up. I think the latest, the census from
85,000.
last year was like a 2% increase. So it's going up a little bit, but not as fast as we would like it to, because there's no homes.
In the next 18 months, they're opening a battery plant that you may have heard of. And then, however, I've heard at Tipton County where the other crisis plan is, they have sold that building possibly, don't know if it's true, rumor, and that they're going to move a lot of those employees back to the other 2 plants. So there is a housing, which is good, and the AV is up, as you said. I have a question. Supposedly there's only 5 districts that you have to talk to. Are their operations similar to ours? And we just found out Lake Ridge is worse. We've talked to the old business manager at Marion. He thought ours was horrible. What are the other districts in the same boat? Are they similar? Operations?
That's challenging.
I would say that the ones that have this committee's reviewed this year all tend to be smaller districts. And when you're a smaller district, you don't have as much flexibility because everything's very tight. I think we've seen a reoccurring theme over the past 2 years of the circuit breaker being one of the main issues. It's not necessarily excessive expenses, it's just the lack of revenue coming in. And, but I think it was noted last year we had 22, 24 districts were on the list, and this year was down to 7 and was really 5, because some people were just late submitting forms. So, it's getting, statewide, it's getting better. But I don't think your situation is not any different, that's much different than what we see. What can we do? And, you know, having being around that 15, 18%, you know, that past year, you're close. You know, so it just, from what you've explained today, you're just kind of diving in and identifying those expenditures. Sometimes they were mathematical calculation, I won't say errors, or from maybe other school districts where instead of, they were just doing it 50%, and then maybe it was 50% of a, not the best number, let's just put it that way. But it's a learning experience for everybody. And, but I think people have been making strides, and the fact that there's not as many districts. I'm not saying the ones that have talked to us or have presented are doing what they should, because obviously you guys are. But I think it's more of a revenue issue than it is an expenditure thing. It's what we've seen.
I guess I just wanted to show, my thought behind all of this is I want to really prove to you guys, we are doing the very best with the money that we're getting. We are, I promise you. But we're sometimes just up against a hard wall, you know.
Like we getting a bus 1 year, 2 years ago. I mean, we usually get a new bus every year. We had to make a tough decision. So Taylor's gonna be fine. As you can see, the AV's up, and we have to keep students. That's the key.
We gotta keep going.
And that's where, and they're very, if you just look in, they're out. They might not be expelled, but they'll move to another school. And then attendance is an issue when you go into another district. It's just, but I'm finding out all through the state, everybody's having the same kind of issues.
Kind of prompted my last question, and Rob and I had this debate last meeting, so I won't rehash all of it. I mean, get to 2 points about the circuit breaker themselves. I mean, this is the system we have. Yeah, I get it has an impact. I'm sympathetic to the impact, but our job is to given this is the revenue to make sure charter legislature is giving us to make sure how it's going to be used. And so, I think it's a misnomer to refer to the circuit breaker loss. I wish we could just get rid of the word loss, because that's just part of the calculation. It would be like prior to 2009 saying, well, you know, I wish I could raise my rate by 8%. Okay, so now what I couldn't do over 5%, that's my loss. No, that's just what what the system restrained you from spending. Now we have a different system to kind of break on that. So it's not like, oh, well, this, you know, whatever thousands of dollars is money we're supposed to have or not. No, that's just. I don't want to call it monopoly, but I mean, it's not real dollar. It's not like, oh, but for we would have had this. It's just a number that goes into the calculation to balance against all the overlying districts. And I get it. Like, it's a one size fits all system, and we have different districts, different mixes of residential, different AV growth rates, and so some districts have it easier than others and more difficult than others. So, which leads to the whole 15% thing is ostensibly the property tax dollars to go for overhead, and what the state's getting from the education fund is for the classroom. Uneasier when you've got AV on the wazoo to be able to devote 100% of the education fund to it. But you got electric bill to pay, you got buses to pay, and so I don't think the legislature necessarily knew what the right percentage was. They said, okay, 50%.
Like, let's try it out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's not for us to say, well, slapping the wrist. It's like we're gathering information from this process as well. So this opportunity for dialogue is for you to show to us too, and we can take this back to General Assembly as well to say that this is what's going on, and it's not a hard and fast threshold. It is a target, and it's a suggested target, which prompts conversations like this, which we can learn from to say, do we need to make changes to the system, or for the districts where it is
more impactful, what do we as policymakers do? And I don't have all those answers, but this is.
Oh, that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
Visitors would like to hear that.
Any other?
Anybody in here been a business manager? Well, and you were, what,
Currently sitting,
yeah, where?
I'm at Lake Central.
Like Central.
He's our ASPO.
Okay.
So.
I will give anyone my job anytime, but no one will take it.
Job.
No, I really do love it. I really do love it. I'm a nerd.
You should have a job shadow. Business manager for days.
Yeah, welcome. Come sit anytime. Anyone's welcome in my office anytime.
And as, I'm not sure who that is, but how she spoke, if there's any ideas you guys have, hey, Maria, the more help we can get, ideas, thoughts, we're willing to listen.
Appreciate you. Trip down.
Yeah, thank you.
So we've got a couple more agenda items, but,
So I do have one question. So will we get a response back from you guys, or what's our next step after this? I'm new to the game.
so that's our next agenda item. It's kind of talk through that and then.
Oh, okay.
Get the court and then I'll be back.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Marley.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time and attention.
Have a good day, everyone.
So, kind of occurred to us last time, like, we have never gotten this phone process, right? That you had the transfer list, people said, that's written documentation. And, previous cases that written documentation was sufficient. So, kind of what came in last time was the first time they ever had anyone come except for the board. And so they presented us, well, thank you. And it didn't occur to me like, we need as a group to kind of assess what are the expectations. So I didn't warn you about this ahead of time, but I kind of like to take a little time, both to look backwards and maybe it'd be better to start with Taylor, since we just heard them. What did you think of what they said? And then do we have any recommended follow-up for either DOE or for DUAB? This next step, and may just be just let things go and see how things go next year, or it may or a more active approach. So why don't we deal with Taylor first, and then we'll come back to McConnell just to see what your reflections are and should go here.
I was happy with Taylor's response, that this was their first time on the list. They weren't. The fact that we do see evidence that their revenues in that operations fund should be increasing, not only through this year in 22, but also looking forward to 23. Now, we also know that we're living in a world where there's a lot of increased inflation and operating expenses are also going up. So any of that additional revenue is going to be going toward those things as well. But just listening to them, I personally was comfortable that they're monitoring it regularly, either monthly or however they are. That was one of the suggestions we gave to Conwell last time, was not just have to wait until the end of that with the Form 9s that we just submitted here in June to the DOE, kind of get a pretty good idea of how we track it. Taylor's already shown us today that they're already tracking for this year under the 15% of their revenues in that fund are increasing. I'm confident that they are monitoring it. I would be surprised if they were on the list for next year, just from what the feedback I got.
I would say, while I appreciated what they had to say, things like that today. The only little concern I have is the large pay raises that they granted, but, obviously that's based on education fund revenue, which is coming from the state and not impacted necessarily by assessed value. But it is impacted by ADM, so I hope that their continued efforts to address that are successful because they need their ADM to continue to grow, to cover these raises that they're giving. So that's a little bit of concern, but just kind of generally overall, I was thinking of something toward the end that they said about, you know, if you have any ideas, blah, blah, blah. It would be kind of nice to come up maybe with a, and I'm thinking of it in respect to what we're thinking about for Lake Ridge, talking to them, asking questions. Maybe we end up with a list of questions that we can, schools can ask themselves as part of these processes and things like that throughout the year. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? About 10, 12 years ago, back in 2010, there, you know, schools threw ideas at DOE for things that everyone should consider. I asked about published stuff as well. Or maybe it's time to kind of bring that up to the 2020s and, you know, offer suggestions. Just things to monitor throughout the year in writing rather than just having discussions. So I was just thinking about that.
I would be curious, so they mentioned they're going to assign some money, because I know the ESSER's, ended in 2 years. If they've kind of thought about, after that 2-year period, how long would the money that they set aside last? If current revenue, current expenditures all stay the exact same, then go up or down. Like, have they thought about how long that would last, going forward? And just from my prior experience of college work, as people I know, they mentioned that high school populations are going down, you know, people having less kids. And so depending on how that region's doing, how that could impact it in that 2 to 3 years once the money's gone.
Kind of just goes to the story of how everything is so intertwined. And I had the same concern with Melissa said about, well, they gave good pay rate, you know, they gave these high pay raises. Looks like they're hoping to do it again now. Are they overstructuring themselves? I think in the materials, they showed that they were under the $40,000 minimum amount. So they legislatively, they were not forced, because I'm sure they wanted to give a good portion of those increases in the first place. But they're in a competitive environment for kids. And what you need to attract people, you need to have good teachers and people have good experience. If you're at the bottom of the scale and not getting good teachers, the education is going to suffer, and then those kids are going to leave. And then your ADM goes down, and then there goes your point. So sometimes, and always, often, you have to spend money and push that money into the classroom with those good raises to keep your good staff. Otherwise, your district's going to go downhill, and then you're in the downward spiral. So I got the impression that they were low. They realized they were low on their wages, had to put that money in order to keep the good educational environment that they are striving for. And really, that's the bottom line. We could sit here and talk about ops and ed and 15%, but really it's the quality of education for kids. And that's what we're here for. And so thinking of how I know I work on going into negotiating season here, yeah, we want to push as much money into the classroom as possible. I was thinking, you mentioned how 15% is a guide and giving feedback to legislators. And I was here like, what if there was no guide? What if there was no 15%? How would we operate? And I think the vast majority, if not all school districts, would put as much money into ed as possible and keep their operations as whatever they need to do to cover that. That's how my district works. Now, a bigger district, I have a little more flexibility. But all school districts, their first priority is to put as much money into ed as possible, education as possible. So if that percentage was 30% arbitrarily, I think people would still be where they are now. They wouldn't be pushing money over there just because they can, because their first priority is to put it in the ed fund. But you have things that are, you need to keep your building going and operating. That's why it's called the operations fund. So I chuckled to myself. I'm like, yeah, the percentage is arbitrary. And in my mind, I know it's, well, the goal and the number. But I'm thinking I would not operate any differently if that number was 25, 30%. And I don't think anyone else would either. They're doing it to try to meet the guide. But in reality, they're really trying to put as much money into the ed fund as possible. They're forced because of revenue loss and in order to keep their buildings in good shape to, goes back to the other thing. You don't want buildings falling apart where people, oh man, I don't want to send my kids there. You've seen their buildings, it looks like a dump. All that plays together when you're in a district like Taylor was, when have open enrollment and you're competing with other districts. So how you allocate those resources, it is a challenge. So you've got to spend money in order to keep yourself up to going. So yeah, the concerns are there. They didn't get into how their salaries and wages compared to their neighbors. But listen, these last couple of years have been rough for everybody. Not only teachers and schools, but state government and everyone. So people are stressed. Sometimes morale has been not the best as well. And whatever we can do for our staffs to show the comfort and to keep them and keep our schools good, that is a big piece that we deal with every single day. And it's not, because people can get up and they can leave and go to another district. So, or another state agency or whatever they want to do. So, yeah, just be conscious of that too.
And I appreciate your comment about the competitive pressures. People want to push as much as they possibly can. But
And it's not just competitive pressure, it's because in the whole back of the mind, we want to push as much money in the classroom because it's for the best thing for kids.
but your thought experiment, if we didn't have any target, obviously charged them something. I forget what district it was because they were like 14.9%.
Correct.
They would have gone over 15 if we didn't have it. So
That's right.
it's supposed to, it's sort of some type of, we can assess the value judgment of it, but it is doing something. I mean, it is having an effect of something.
Yes.
But yeah, that's one thing about it. But the competitive pressures. So back to the question, Taylor, what you recommend? We're comfortable that they can get more action this year.
I was trying to what they're right. The board kind of set them up for failure by giving that up to 20% and within the treasurer. If they limit it to 15, they might even be on the list. But when he asked the question about how do they compare to other school operations, that was kind of interesting. I don't think I could comment on that, but I do look at all the audit reports for all the schools that are on our list, and theirs were actually kind of clean in comparison to the other schools, just in relation to how many findings they had. They had their textbook rental fund overdrawn by about $200,000 and it's slightly growing each year, and a couple of internal control issues. So I think they're operating well, at least in all.
Also, the DOE, I can't remember. Does your office have any intention to send any status reports after these first 6 months of formalizing process, though? Everything's settled, not that it ever slows down in the fall. I get that, but once we formalize our process, like in September, October, say, hey, go to your Form 9 for this 6 month period, your transfer percentage was blank, so that maybe by the end of the year, people had to make adjustments, it would still give them some time.
Right.
Not only these districts that we're talking about, but all of them statewide.
Right, and we did that last year,
Yeah.
I believe, too. So, yeah.
And it's only a 6 month window.
Right. It
But
just
it's at
shows
least
them
how
how
people-
things are playing.
So that would be a suggestion, not to put anything more on your
Yeah.
office, but. Okay.
Anything else with him? Can we backwards the last month, we can remember the discussion platform. My recollection is that they talk about I think it was bus replacement that they had to do in 2020, and then that kind of through their operations went down, and they kind of replenished it as education fund. I think we know. If I were trying to pin down to the crux of why they were over 15 last year, that was the reason they also had any regard for that presentation.
They were at 18.34% of their transfer percentage. It's not close.
My other takeaway, both from them and even this morning, we just kind of sensed, what do we do now? Like, I need to do a better job of preparing them for what this is about. Like even like I said, they could have explained, hey, in 2020, we had some bus stuff. They could have told us that in a letter. Like, we didn't need to haul them here. But I think there's a kind of a disconnect in terms of what this is all about. I just think that we're just slapping on the wrist and like, there's, I think we sometimes kind of support some trees or we don't help them see the forest of what we're trying to accomplish here. Like next, yeah, please.
Maybe a letter or something like kind of outlining the code, intent, the improvements.
Yeah, and in statute, it's pretty clear, like, these are the things that we're looking for you to respond with. But frankly, I didn't see much of that in here at all. I mean, so maybe some better instruction for Jeff. It wouldn't have come, like I said, some of that could have been addressed in the letter, when they respond to us, but certainly if we're going to take the step to have them come, so this is, you are with this. They seem to be, I get it, it's the first time anyone's been through the process, that a little more guidance of what we're. Yeah, go ahead.
I can just interject on that for a second. I mean, the one thing I would say is, as we look at what IDOE's initial role is on it, really what we are trying to determine is whether or not the documentation they provided to us satisfactorily explains what happened and what they are doing about it.
Right.
And I do feel like when we contact them initially saying, hey, you are above that 15%, the information we do provide to them does kind of talk through, okay, here's what you need to be providing to us. So I hear what you're saying. I do think that at least in a couple of these instances, the initial letter that they provided to us probably could have been more comprehensive in terms of outlining, here's what we have actually done to try to address this. And that's really where our determination is have they satisfactorily explained that they're addressing their situation? And so I do think that there was probably an opportunity for some folks who were asked to come in to avoid that process based off of that initial letter that was provided to us. And again, this was the first year that we actually did move people into that next phase. So hopeful that perhaps next year, as we would get to that point, others would maybe learn from that experience. Put decent effort towards that response letter to us initially to really kind of lay out their case prior to having to have you guys bring them in to provide more information.
And I would add to that, going back to the first year, we went through the process. A few schools started sending in information related to why they didn't meet the 15%. And we noticed it wasn't as in-depth as we would expect. So we modified it to include a checklist of here's what we would like to see or know about, et cetera. Kind of basically mimicking what's in the statute to, get more detail in. But so I agree with Courtney. I feel like we're telling them this is important, get it in, et cetera. Maybe a little more background in the letter as to just kind of some of the comments that you made were pretty good as far as, going through this process enables us to better understand what your school is going through. The information that you share helps us, I don't know if I'm gonna say helps us provide additional information to the General Assembly, kind of make it a little more meaty as far as the upfront letter, but we did, we gave them opportunity to provide data by providing the checklist, et cetera. So, it's just, I think people will probably look at these meetings now for schools that are coming in and see what they presented and talked about. And a lot of what they talked about, I wish it was in the original letter because it would have been good and nice to read and have documented, et cetera. So sometimes it just takes bringing a few in verbally to let others see what would be most helpful in writing.
And regardless of what we ask them, I think that forest and trees dynamic is part of it too. Here you have someone, their job is to make sure the books are balanced. You've got all this stuff in every fund, they're reporting on this. And then I come in here and I give whiplash and say, well, I want you to, talk about these macro issues. And it's, they're kind of, there's kind of an initial struggle, like, can you answer that? Yeah, it's not a question that they're used to looking at.
Mhm.
Their focus is more on, hey, we want to get these teachers raises next year. How are we going to do that? And not
Right.
all pieces fit together. So again, I'm being sympathetic to that. It's just trying to see why that dynamic exists and how we can, looking forward to next year, how we might be able to use that and set all those expectations.
And I still think a lot of what we're seeing, maybe no one wants to hear this, is impacted by COVID and what they had to initially do before the federal funds came in 20. In 21, I feel like that was less of an impact because they did have the federal dollars. But hopefully, calendar year 22, we get back to somewhat more normal operations. And then we can get, a more clear picture of what's going on in the schools.
So in terms of next steps for the conflict, next year, or we revisit them. Very good. It's probably the last time we need to meet for 2022, plus something around is something metrics. I think for the Memphis transfer list, outstanding one is like Rich, we kind of have a process for receiving that. And, I'll try to keep the community informed as that proceeds working with you. Any other thoughts for the good of the order? Very good. All right, adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Good. So